Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming back so promptly. It's my pleasure to introduce the next session this afternoon, Activating Social Empathy, Learning with and from Youth Researchers. And I really, emphasise the word with, because our two youth researchers today, Aisling Dunphy and Beth are going to share their personal stories and reflections with us this afternoon. So it's going to be a particularly special session. I think in terms of us reflecting on questions that you might want to ask at the end of the session, just to think about the depersonalisation in the questions. These young people are extraordinary representatives of their generation, and I think will be quite happy to answer questions as extraordinary representatives of their generation, but not on the personal level. So it's my pleasure to introduce, as always, Professor Pat Dolan, whom I think hugely highly of, Aisling Dunphy, and I'm sure you've read the bio in your pack, the extraordinary words nicknamed Angels and Wellies, because of her work in the aftermath of Storm Frank, and I just had to say that. I just am too taken with that expression not to say it publicly. But also Aisling was awarded the 2017 National Spirit of Community Award. Congratulations, Aisling. It's absolutely brilliant for someone who's just in their very young years. And Beth, absolutely the Abbott Life to the Fullest Award. So really, as I introduce these two young youth researchers with the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre in Galway, I am introducing two very inspirational young people with the inspirational Professor Pat Dolan.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Try that again. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay. So you've all eaten your lunch and are ready for action. Before we dig into this, just to say that I was very taken by various things we heard this morning, and actually, I think both papers really fit in very closely to some of the things that the three of us, are going to present to you this afternoon. I had a thought about school and, that thing about difference and empathy from teachers, and that whole thing about, remembering teachers who showed you empathy when you were young and teachers who didn't show you empathy. And you can think of that in your first days in school. And I went to a Christian Brothers school in Dublin, which is an interesting story behind that. But I remember one particular, and this fits in with Kathleen's conversation about age. There was a particular Christian brother from North Kerry we called him Brother O'Shea, who taught us, I was about 14 in school, and he was well in his 80s. And every day, the conversation was, every day, will Brother O'Shea be in? Because we were basically waiting for him to die on the basis we get a day off school. So eventually one day Brother O'Shea did not turn up, and we thought we'd be out of the school by 9:30 when the head brother came in to say, I've very sad news about Brother O'Shea. We started rubbing our hands. We weren't particularly fond of Brother O'Shea, as you can glean from what I'm saying. And they said, a very sad news about Brother O'Shea. His father died. His father was 106. Anyway, so you live and learn. Okay, so basically what we're going to do today, the three of us, working as a team, is share some stuff with you around empathy and challenge you a little bit as well, in a nice, gentle way. And in terms of what you heard already this morning, I do want to start off by just in a very gentle way, look at the issue of systems. And what I mean by systems is that, can you say that empathy is guaranteed with everybody who works with a young person in a service, be that a teacher, a social worker, whatever it is? And can you assume that you will be demonstrated empathy? Anybody in this room, me included, who's been distressed and needed a service, you know very quickly when you're not getting empathy. It's very blatant to you. And I do think, and I think Kathleen was right in saying that, because some people are paid so poorly, their likelihood of their capacity to demonstrate empathy is weakened. But I do have to say you should be guaranteed empathy. If you bring a car like any service, you bring a car to be serviced, and they tell you the brakes may or may not work after you take the car home, you wouldn't be too happy. So similarly, I do think that if you do go to a service, you should be guaranteed respect, empathy, and before other things happen, as David quite rightly put it this morning. But I also think that that challenge applies to us here in the Research Centre and in the research community. So we're really interested, as you know, for many years in looking at both family support and youth development. And we've looked at core issues of how do you enable resilience in young people and families who have difficulty. And we've done a lot of research on that. Certainly we've looked a lot at how you enlist social support for young people, both perceived and received in their life. We're interested in the core issue of attachment and positive attachment. And certainly we've been looking at social capital and social ecology. And we've looked at that in the context of reflective practice. But thanks to Mary Gordon, where is Mary? Mary's here in the front. Thanks to an engagement with Mary Gordon 5 years ago, Mary? About 5 years ago in Dublin, I had a eureka moment, but I was clothed. But I certainly had a road to Damascus epiphany when Mary and I started talking about empathy, and I really learned not just about roots of empathy, but about the concept of empathy, and it was an absolute awakening for me. And one thing I realised, and have realised since then, is that actually, not that we've been putting the cart before the horse, because I think the work we've done here has been great, and I've been so blessed with the team that works with me here. But I do think that there was the underpinning bit missing. And the underpinning bit was active social empathy, and we're going to look at that very closely. So those of us in the room that are bespectacled, okay, lumière, as they say en français, those of us who wear spectacles, hands up who wear spectacles, a lot, okay? So when you go for an eye test, you know the way they go, better with or without. Actually, this doesn't work really. I should explain, because when I don't have, as you can see, my hair is not what it was. When I go to a barber, they take off my glasses when the barber's cutting my hair, and at the end he puts a mirror at the back of your head and says, do you like it or is it okay? There could be an elephant on the back of my head, I can't see it, but you never say, yeah, it's okay. But anyway, normally when you go for an eye test, you get this better with or without. You know the way they move the thing? So, if you're a young person receiving a service or a parent, better with or without? With or without? I think the answer is obvious. So, the good news is, Ananta will certainly give us this good news tomorrow, I hope, is that it's never too late. That there is great news from neuroscience about this in terms of empathy. And this is why we've become very interested in empathy education. Just to say that Michelangelo made this great comment, and Cora Imparo, I am still learning. We are certainly still learning. And youth as researchers, I'm not going to dwell on it too long, but it is a project that we're very proud of here. And certainly the work that myself and Dr. Danielle Kennan have been doing over the last 4 or 5 years in terms of working with youth as researchers has already, I think, shown great results. And as you gleaned from Killian this morning, he's been a great supporter of it. There are pros and cons in youth researchers. The obvious pro is the idea that young people learn research and do research with other young people, and there are many examples of that. And you know, it is that you get a different form of evidence in terms of insightful evidence, and that is something that we're very interested in. The one argument I would say is that, you know, there are people in the sciences, not alone in the social sciences, but certainly within the social sciences, who would see the idea of youth and children doing research as touchy-feely, as not really important, as not real research. There is this, you know, hierarchical aspect or view taken of research. That randomized controlled trial is the golden, and you work your way down. I don't accept that argument at all. I think that it should be more horizontal. And Alan Fives and John Canavan and I have written this paper talking about research as being pluralistic. So I go to Lidl, I don't buy everything in Lidl, I buy some things in Aldi. Research should be to fit the purpose. It should not be about this idea of up and down a ladder. That's not, we've done randomized controlled trial research in the centre here, we've done quasi-experimental, we've done qualitative, ethnographic research. There are different types of research. But I do think that we do need to give respect in a very real way, because we're already seeing how real and effective engaging youth in training them as researchers has been. So we've started this initiative, which we call YES, Youth Empathy as Social Values, which my good colleague Dr. Bernadine Brady constructed the name. And Bernadine is leading on an Irish Research Council grant, which we've just started, looking at social empathy, working with Dr. Charlotte Silk, particularly here in the centre, where we're looking to do a baseline study of young people in school to try and just gauge how empathic are young people. It's a really interesting question. So we're going to try and answer that question as a baseline. That's married to an action project which myself and other colleagues, including Danielle and Brian McGrath, are involved in, where we're looking at the implementation of empathy education in secondary schools. And we're starting this pilot in the autumn. We've worked very closely with Feroiga, and we've already trialled it with youth groups in Tyrrellstown and Dublin, and we're building this up. The case for empathy education in schools is going to be made by Ciara Beth shortly, so I will leave that to her expertise. But just to remind ourselves of a key question for a research question as a social scientist is, for me, is what is it in a young person that gets them to move from static to activate empathy? Static empathy is something that you can have. Activated empathy, or as they say in Roots of Empathy, action empathy, are things that we move from. I'm really, really interested in what are, as a scientist, what are the factors that enable that to happen? And we know this happens not alone from 9/11 tsunami, Hurricane Katrina, and the earthquake in Haiti, that the first people in all those cases in to help in every one of those cases was youth. They were the first in. They were first pushed aside by emergency services, but they were the first in. And Mark and I Mark Brennan and I have been working and looking at this. So the case in relation to static to active empathy is going to be made for you in a very spectacular fashion, I think, by Aisling Dunphy. No pressure, Aisling. So, in terms of the curriculum that we're developing around empathy education in secondary schools, there are basically three components. Youth as researchers who do research on an issue that is really important in their lives, and rather than produce a boring research report which nobody reads, including the nerds in this place, we actually produce a video which is about 5 minutes long. And that is used as material in the classroom to educate around empathy. We're marrying that with use of libraries and literature. So there's so much empathy in everything Charles Dickens wrote. There's so much empathy in To Kill a Mockingbird or in the Harry Potter books. So we're going to look at how libraries and literature can be used, and also the wider arts. Working with sound surfers, text-based, and particularly with Freudian sound surfers, we're looking at how other arts can be used as that. So this is a work in progress, bringing together this idea of reflective learning. So here are some examples. Most of these are on the website of youth as researcher studies that have been completed, and mainly in collaboration with Feroiga and with others as well. So we've one from West Talla on where youth were very concerned about safety and understanding if you're LGBT. So youth from West Talla on a Feroiga project there did an incredible study and made a brilliant video. Young people who were homeless themselves in rural Leitrim, who were actually homeless themselves, did research on youth, on attitudes to youth who were homeless and the issues they had about having to hide the fact that they were homeless. Again, an excellent project. In Ballina, they did research on youth mental health needs and awareness. And more recently, again in Ballina, young people are doing research on direct access by youth to family support services. Not through their mother or father, but them directly, which is a very interesting concept. In the US, colleagues here from Penn State with Mark, with the guidance of Mark, I hope, Mark Brennan, are looking at, youth are looking at race and police violence and attitudes to that in the US. And most recently in Kerry, a group of young people have been doing research on online gambling among young people, which is a kind of unspoken problem and very interesting research. So these are really good examples of things that young people bring up that they feel are important, all feeding into empathy education. So finally, this is fitting into a wider international context. I'm going to work my way up from the bottom, if that's okay. So just to say that, you might say, well, why is empathy education? What's the big deal about it? Well, actually, it's compulsory for this country, which I spoke to the Minister for Education about. Because Ireland is a member of UNESCO, a very active member of UNESCO, I hope. And under its Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 4.7 around education, around global citizenship education, young people have a human right to empathy education in schools. Whether that's implemented is a different question, but that's what we're hoping to achieve. And just to say that Mark and I have been commissioned to extend the Youth as Researchers Youth Empathy Education Programme to a 4-country study, which we will be commencing on the autumn, we hope. Yeah, here in Ireland, with the support of people like these people to my left, a state in the USA, Canada, a region in Canada, to be determined, possibly Ontario, and with some colleagues in Nigeria as well that we've been working with. The reason those countries are chosen is for a variety of reasons, but one of them is because of English language, because it's the language English. So young people will be able to converse with each other by Skype and all these fantastic things around what they're learning. And this is part of a global chairs network that Mark and I lead on, which we're pretty excited about. So, as I've said before, this is a bit of I've said on many occasions before, this is a bit like a Jamie Oliver recipe. So the bit where he shows you at the beginning what you need to put in, and then he produces fantastic things. So Ciara, Beth and Aisling are now going to take over. So it's up to you, Ciara, Beth, okay?
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Bear with me. This is the first kind of conference thing I've ever done. So thanks for that. Thank you, Pat, for the lovely introduction. I'm Ciara Beth. I do a lot of kind of work in here in the Child and Family Research Centre, particularly surrounding autism, but also surrounding empathy. I'm just going to show you a video to give you a kind of my background a little bit. So. I'm Ciara Beth. I'm 15 years old and I'm autistic. Everybody struggles with something. There just happens to be a label for the things I struggle with. People forget I'm human. I have a personality. I hate homework. I love music. I have favorite musicians and TV shows. I love chocolate. And I just want to fit in. Autism is only part of who I am. My autism causes me to struggle to understand what you're talking about when you say things like, the cat is out of the bag. Which cat, what bag, and where are the two of them? In fact, in general, I learn and understand things better if you show me, as opposed to tell me. I'm a creature of habit. I need routine and consistency to be able to function. Even the slightest change in plans can cause me to have a meltdown, which is frequently mistaken as being a tantrum because a bratty teenager can't have her way. Really, it's a cry for help. It means my brain's too overwhelmed to be able to do even the simplest of things. I have significant sensory issues. I can't deal with loud noises or unfamiliar textures. I get very anxious and stressed over tiny details that seem insignificant to you. I can't understand how people enjoy the noisiness of discos, and it completely isolates me because I don't enjoy the typical activities of a 15-year-old. And that causes me to feel so frustrated. My special interests or obsessions isolate me because I can't maintain interests in other subjects, and a lot of them aren't common interests for 15-year-old girls. There's something so comforting about music. There's no pressure, there's no need to use words unless you want to. There are no rules. You aren't expected to make eye contact or pick up on body language. I can sing and I play 5 instruments, but without a doubt my favourite instrument is my violin. It's so empowering to be in charge of the care and upkeep of something you love. Whether I'm playing or listening to Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, Queen's We Will Rock You, or anything in between, I feel safe, happy, and free.
So, that's me. That's a little old now. That was made 2 years ago, but it's all still completely true, other than the age thing. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a little bit about basically my story and how empathy education in schools might have made my life a little bit easier. So I started preschool when I was 3 years old. I was living in New York at the time, so went into the classroom and knew from the first minute of the first day of school I was different. And I went home and I explained it to Mum, and she, like any encouraging parent, didn't want me to feel different and didn't want me to feel isolated. So she said, "Oh no, you're not different, you're just like the rest of them," thinking it was maybe a cultural thing, because I was made very aware that I was Irish from a very young age, and we kept a lot of the Irish traditions going at home, even though we weren't living in Ireland. So time went by anyway, and when I was 13 years old, I moved from primary school. So we moved back to Ireland when I was 5. Went from primary school to secondary school, which is a big transition for anyone. I also went from an English-speaking primary school to an all-Irish-speaking secondary school. So when I started secondary school, there was the initial large change of different school, different teachers. There was the change every 40 minutes for classes. And there was also a language barrier. A funny story, for anyone who's familiar with autism, change in autism, just don't go there. It doesn't work. So naturally, problems started arising, and my GP and my parents were concerned. And at 14, I was diagnosed officially as having high-functioning autism spectrum disorder. Knowing that I was struggling a lot at school, so I'm not top of the class academically, I'm a lot better than I was, but I'm definitely not top of the class. So I struggle a little bit academically, struggle a little bit socially as well. So I decided, do you know what? Maybe if I sit my classmates down in a classroom and kind of do it in a non-confrontational way, where I explain to them, how things that they might be doing might be upsetting me, so that I don't seem as irrational and crazy, maybe it'll help. So I did that. Worst idea ever. Funny story, people don't like being told what they're doing is wrong, and they especially don't like it from a 17-year-old girl. So my theory is, what I did wrong, I was blaming people. So instead of just saying that these are things I struggle with, I said, these are things I struggle with. Here's what's happening that's bothering me. Here's how we can fix it. It was just too much information. They'd no idea. They couldn't wrap their heads around it. First, they were trying to wrap their heads around, okay, what does autism mean? Forget, what difficulties that entails, and it was a whole new definition for them. And they had known me for 2 years at this point. So they were trying to work out in their heads, like I was, what's Beth and what's autism and where's the line? So they responded semi-negatively to that. But my personal theory is, if we were to have had that program in place from first year, or even from junior infants, and had a much more general approach that this is a difficulty that some people have. This person is just like you. They have the same feelings, they have hobbies and they have interests, and they have a mom and a dad, but they struggle with this. And we need to accommodate for that, and we need to tolerate that. Maybe it would have made a big difference. Empathy education is something that I really, really care about, because I know that things were kind of bad for me. Where they were kind of bad for me, I know they are at least 10 times worse for at least 90% of other autistic children out there. Because a lot of children with autism don't have the ability to say what they need. Empathy education isn't going to be an overnight fix. Bad news for you, blanket approaches don't work. If we say this is going to be a one-size-fits-all endeavor, it's never going to work, because even humans by their very nature are different anyway. And if we try to say this is one big blanket of things that everyone should be tolerant to, we're going to miss something. It's just how it is. There are too many things to try and incorporate into one. So the main thing that we need to focus on, and I think, Pat, you'll agree with me when I say, is tolerating differences. It doesn't matter what the difference is, whether it be cultural, whether it be ability, whether it be, anything. There's a difference there. It's fine to acknowledge that difference, but it's important to be tolerant of that difference and to be aware of how we can offend someone who is different from us. Because people are offended different ways anyway. But when you come to a cultural barrier, or come to a religious barrier, or come to an ability barrier, those people are sensitive to those topics. And empathy education would be the way to kind of soothe that issue. It's not going to be an overnight thing either. We're not going to bring this program in on a Monday morning in a school somewhere in southeast Cork and wake up on Friday morning and all of the problems in that school are going to be solved. You're still going to have ignorant people, lads. It's just how it's going to be. So there are always going to be people who aren't going to listen. And aside from the fact that empathy is an ongoing, evolving, changing thing, for each person, empathy by its very definition is difficult to define. Because what empathy means for me and what empathy means for every other person in this room, it could have a slightly different meaning. So if we start today in one classroom in southeast Cork, in a junior infant classroom, and keep going in that school all the way up to 6th class, and then follow that class across to secondary school, and all the way at the end of secondary school, and we keep bringing it in every year after that, we're eventually going to have a school system in southeast Cork that are going to have more empathetic students. They're not going to be completely empathetic to everything. Teenagers, by the structure of them, aren't always the most tolerant human beings. But they're going to be more empathetic and more aware of people's differences. That pretty much wraps up what I have to say. I'm now going to hand you over to my trusty friend, Aisling, who is going to demonstrate to you what active empathy really is. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. I think you explained your topic and part of education system. If empathy was in the education system very well. Thank you. So you've heard what I'm here to talk about, which is a project that was set up in January 2016 called Angels and Wellies. I won't go into too much detail because I'm going to show you a video in a minute, but some of the things that aren't in the video, so basically through social media I seen how the floods had affected Carrick-on-Shore, and then I decided to do something about it. So I put up on social media, did anyone want to come and clean up? And then with the help of fellow young people who decided they would help and clean up, and the Froiga in Carrick-on-Shore where I go, we were able to set up a committee, and so what we did, we cleaned out houses who got flood damaged. We cooked dinners and meals for the volunteers who were helping out and for the residents who were affected, and we also created care packages. So I'll just show you the video now.
As patron of the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this youth research video. The Centre believes that young people researching and talking to other young people about what issues directly affect them can give us a powerful insight into what matters in their lives. Ensuring the voices of young people are heard is an issue close to my heart. Research driven by youth can enable young people to add their voices and influence change on issues that matter to them. The following video is an example of how their research can be used as a tool to advocate for change.
I was at home and I seen an RT news clip on Facebook of Carrick when the floods hit, and I thought there was something I could do to help people who didn't have family and friends to help them clear out after the floods.
My mum just said, look, there's Ashland after posting onto Facebook about going and helping in the floods, and I was thinking, she wants me to go do it, so I'll go do it, because that's just the way it is with my mum. It's like, you do this and that's it. My first thought about getting together to help was that, well, there's a problem here and I might as well go and help them because I'm not doing anything really. At home I was doing nothing, I was just sitting home on my phone.
It was the 29th of December, 2015. Water started coming in the front door. I've got 2 dogs, the little one noticed it first, and I immediately rang the town council. It was very hard getting through, and they said, oh, we'll send an engineer around. And I said, I don't want an engineer, I want a boat. I'm the youngest at 65, I was then, 64, 65. I'm the youngest in the street. I've got an 89, 90-year-old living next door. I said, we need boats, we need something to get these elderly people out.
The water came up about as far as here, but because there's a slope here and it goes flat, most of the water remained down there, but it started to travel up here, but it didn't come up the full way. It only came about as far as here, and all down by the bridge was all flooded too. This is actually the River Suir, and it has flooded before, but I don't think the town took many precautions to it, seeing as it happened again and they weren't very prepared for it. Everyone was saying the bridge was actually going to fall because of the strength of the water, as it was like crashing against all up here, because this is a very old bridge.
I don't have family in Carrick-on-Shoal, I don't have family in Ireland, but I just opened the door and there's this group of kids there saying, can we do anything to help?
We didn't really know what we were in for. When we opened the garage, all her stuff was just like floating around. We just kind of looked at each other and was like, is this a good or a bad idea?
Everyone in Carrick was never really close to each other. Everyone kind of had their own groups, and that's the way it was. The young person and older people relationship was never really good, but since they heard about Angels and Wellies and heard that it was mostly younger people who decided to help out all the elderly people, because over in Mill Street it is mostly elderly people, and that's kind of where we aimed most, and then we moved around to other places. So when they heard that we were helping out, I think the relationships started to get a little better, because they kind of realised not all young people are bad.
In the street where I live, I think a lot of the people there were there because they're tiny little one-bedroom places. They were there because they didn't have family like myself, even though I was in a private house. I think they had a different attitude, perhaps, to young people. You'd hear some of them saying, oh, you know, those young people hanging around with nothing to do. Yes, with nothing to do. I was waiting at the bus stop one day, and there was a group of young people. They were dressed up in their best in the afternoon, and one elderly lady said to myself and the others, oh, look at those young ones over there. They should be in school. They're obviously taking the day off and going to a party or something. And there was another elderly lady, very quiet, standing off to her side that I knew, and I went over and I said, do you know what's going on over in the park? And she said they lost one of their own, one of the lads from the high school. Killed himself a few days ago, and it's the funeral. I think it's harder for the elderly who don't mix with young people. You know, if there's not that bridge of the daughter or the son and the grandchildren, then it must be harder for them to realise the difficulties and problems that young people have in a small town, small Irish town, particularly rural areas.
One of the girls who was in the group, she said herself she didn't have a good kind of reputation for herself, and she was going through the town and there was an old person in front of her, and as soon as they looked up and seen her, they actually crossed the road as fast as they could to get away from her. I'd be very hurt anyway if I was walking towards someone and they crossed the street, because you'd feel like you're really intimidating when you really don't think you are.
Before Angels and Wellies, if you were walking around, a lot of like elderly people would have kind of kept to themselves on the street. I think that's changed. Like, if you're walking up the street, a lot of the time, like, they will talk to you and ask you, like, how you are, and, you know, there's a conversation. It's not false, you know, that there's a relationship there between the older generation and younger people in the town.
When people have said, you know, are you getting over the floods and things like that? And I've said yes, and, you know, the young people from Feroga helped greatly. And they said, yes, aren't they wonderful? You know, we can be very proud of our young people, so.
I think it was kind of an empathy kind of a thing, because, you know, I put myself in their place and I said, well, if I was flooded, I'd want someone to help me, so I might as well go and help them. And, you know, I'd be more helpful and, you know, help other people. You put yourself in the place of others.
Those young people had empathy, not just sympathy. Oh, those poor people down there, you know. It's easy enough to do, but to say, how would I feel? Or how would my grand feel if they were alone? And they were down there losing everything, you know. I think the elderly people who were affected by the floods and who were helped by those young people, I think they have some empathy now for young people, and it's made them more aware of how kind they can be, how good they are, and how you know, how precious our young people in Carrick-on-Shore are.
It wasn't that we were doing it for praise. We were simply doing it because we thought it was like the right thing to do. Us, the elderly people, the River Rescue, the Feroga leaders, we were all in the one boat. Like, nobody was superior to anyone else. And I think that's what empathy is, like, just to have an understanding. It's weird to look at yourself up there. But like the speakers we had earlier, like with Kathleen and as Pat said, active empathy, the two of them kind of touched on teaching and youth work and stuff. And like, I know it's not my part, it was Ciara's part to say about empathy education, but this links in with active empathy. At the minute, CSPE is in secondary schools and you do an action project. So basically how it is, it's civic, social, political education. And you do like a bit about charity work and all that. But then you do an action project and you do like a one-day thing, but it's kind of teacher or adult led. Whereas like with the youth research project, it's youth led. Like it's not not all CSP projects are teacher led, but like it's us doing what we feel is needed in the town and stuff. Like in Feroga and Carrick, there has been previous projects done with the elderly. There was the Glamour Girls, and then this year Citizenship sitting with Sadie. Like, it is something that needed to be kind of focused on as well, because we do have a bad perception in the town. Like, well, we did before this, it was worse. But like, there's just a misunderstanding, and with empathy, like, we now know those who don't have family, and they know like the young people who aren't gonna, we're not gonna egg them or throw stuff at them. Like, we're just, there's this kind of assumptions, like just stereotypes and things there, when like there's no way some of us would do it, like, but like the whole thing earlier, Kathleen spoke about for-profit organisations and stuff, and like with things like this, I think having young people involved is really critical at the minute, because like, at the minute, I don't know if there's many into current affairs and stuff, but last week in the Shannon was a bill proposed by Senator Lynn Ruane and Senator Aodhán Ó Ríordáin, and it was the Reduce the Harm bill for drug use, and it didn't get passed. It's going to be negotiated or whatever. But like, young people need to be involved in politics and projects like this, because, for example, that Reduce the Harm bill was to do with healthcare and stuff for addicts. Like, there's young people in care who, once they leave the system, they're into the housing crisis, they're into the, like, you know, broken homes, different scenarios, and these type of things give young people the opportunity to actually speak up about, because it's like a cake. When you see the advertisements for Childline or, you know, all these great organisations, you think that there is something there, but then when, like, if there's icing on the cake and you cut into it, there's actually no real support, or, you know, the cake isn't nice. Like, there's nothing there, like, for a lot of the time for these young people who are in socioeconomic disadvantaged areas. And we need to, like, from me living in rural Ireland, I can't speak for someone who lives in inner city Dublin. You know, we need all these projects, and, like, the whole empathy thing, it's just understanding what, you know, other people, especially young people, because in politics at the minute, I know we have a few new younger ministers and stuff coming through, but it's like up here making decisions for people down here when they don't actually know what they want. You know, there's a homeless man in Dublin, and if any of you pass Arnott's, you might know him. He was in the High Hopes Choir, Tommy Cunningham. And I speak to him a good bit in Dublin, and I went up to him one day and he was really annoyed and giving out, and he said, you know the saying, beggars can't be choosers, and he was giving out about it, and he said, if someone comes up to me with a ham sandwich and I don't want it, I could be Muslim, and if he says I don't want it, they say, oh, you know, beggars can't be choosers, what, you know, you're never happy, whatever. If you go up to him with credit, say for Vodafone, I have an O2 phone or 3, you know, you can never be happy. But if you went over and asked him, you know, what would you like, and he said a bar of chocolate, and you got, you know, rather than having this making decisions, and then you go down and you get annoyed, but you never consulted the person in the first place. So, like, this is a really good example of how you can do that. But again, with the active, you have to do it. You know, you can say you're going to do it, and you can write it out and blah, 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 but you actually have to do it. You know, the active, you know, some politicians, you know, they say they do it. 5 years down the line, we're still waiting, you know, active, do it, you know, like, all these things, you know, you propose something and you're told, like, oh, it's going to be negotiated and it'll go through. Whereas I think with young people, sometimes, like, for example, with Angels and Wellies, when we first decided to do it the first day after going to Veronica's house, we took a break and we got a phone call from the county council to say that, you know, we shouldn't have been doing it, basically, that it was all like red tape kind of, and we had no insurance. So we kind of said, you know, okay, well, we'll take it on board ourselves and knock on the doors, and if they don't want us to go in, like, we won't go in and stuff. And then the next day we needed the skip to be brought away and a new one, but there was the council that were doing that. And when we rang, they were like, yeah, we'll send someone down or whatever. And then they told us that we didn't need to be knocking on the houses and stuff. But the next day when we went down with the dinners, we knocked on one of the elderly people's doors, and she wasn't there. And it was the civil defence that came out, because they were doing the clean-up. So, like, between ourselves and the civil defence, I don't really know what the council were doing, but they weren't being active. You know, like, if they're going to tell us on the phone we're doing it, they weren't. Like, so if we didn't do it and civil defence weren't there, two voluntary bodies, the actual people who are being paid to do it weren't doing it, you know. So, like, active again, it's just the main thing. If you're going to say it, you do it. Like, you talk the talk and you have to walk the walk, because there's no point. Again, I'd just like to thank Pat for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.